My name's Eugene Worley, and along with my wife Glenda, we have spent nearly 50 years in ministry in Ethiopia, Norway, the UK, and in the US. I'd like in these podcasts to share with you some of our experiences from those years.
Lasting friends. Friends are friends forever, from a song by Michael W. Smith, is certainly true. God gave us some wonderful friends in Ethiopia, and even though we have been away for quite a few years, those friends remain, and we remain in contact with many of them. We had been friends with Don and Phyllis Sidebottom since college days in the 60s. When we came to Ethiopia in 1968, Don and Phyllis were working on a station in the north. There they worked with another missionary family who had established a school and a church. They also did trek work, where they went into some remote regions which were not accessible by vehicle. Prior to the revolution in the early 70s, they moved back to Addis Ababa and established a Bible Institute. However, after the revolution, they returned and continued working with the churches and the Bible Institute. They were a big help to us when we returned in 1998. We had great fellowship with lots of laughter and many special memories. They soon had to retire because of their health, and today both are in their forever home. We look forward to the day that we can be together and rejoice with them for the many Ethiopians that came to Christ during those years. Jean also graduated from Bible College with Karen Otterson, who with her husband Frank arrived in Ethiopia a few months before we came in 1968. They served in a semi-desert region where they opened a clinic and established a school. When the revolution came, they spent many years in the country of New Guinea, but returned to Ethiopia in 1999. Jean and Frank worked together with the Sudanese refugees and made several trips to the South Sudan border of Ethiopia. We had many great experiences together and value their friendship. Among our many Ethiopian friends were Berhanu Yosef and his wife, Wubit. When we left Ethiopia in 1971, Berhanu's father worked at the airport. He went on the plane to tell us goodbye, and Jean told him that if we did not see him again, we would see him in heaven. Berhanu was 12 years old at the time, and when he heard what he had said, the Lord spoke to his heart concerning the reality of heaven and how he needed to be saved before he could go there. He received Christ and during the revolution was imprisoned for preaching the gospel. After the revolution, he turned the prison into a church. When we returned to Ethiopia in 1998, Jean preached for him, and they worked together in the church's outreach ministry. Later, he and Wubit came to the States and went to many churches giving their testimony. They were here at the time of my mom's death, and they learned the difference between Ethiopian and American funerals. They were amazed at the lack of outward show of grief, which is so common in the Ethiopian culture. They were such a blessing to us and to the churches they visited. Sometime after we arrived in Ethiopia in 1998, we heard of a missionary who was leaving the field and was selling all his household goods. Word spread like wildfire, as missionaries could always find things they could not find on the local economy. We went over to his house on a Saturday morning to see if there was anything we could use. We did find a desk, bookcases, and some other useful items. While we were there, a young Ethiopian man introduced himself to us and began talking about what we were doing. He was well acquainted with the problems that new missionaries faced when coming into the country. He said he was an accountant, and if we ever needed any help with anything, he would be more than happy to help us. Dawit Hailu became one of our dearest friends. He did become our accountant, but assisted Jean, who was the director of our mission, with many of the things he had to do. This involved dealing with the Ministry of Justice and the different government agencies. He was also a great help with getting our driver's license renewed, our car registration, and answering many questions for us. He also advised us concerning finding a doctor as well as hiring workers. He was a believer but was anxious to learn more. He sat around our table many times and studied the scriptures with Jean. We got acquainted with his family, who were also believers, and had the opportunity to visit their homes as well. One day, Dawit came and told us about his friend, Wudasi. She was a believer, though lacking assurance, and wanted to study the scriptures with us. I was able to spend much time with her, helping her with the basics of the Christian life. She was such a sweet lady, and it soon became apparent that she and Dawit had a very serious relationship. Jean began premarital counseling with them and taught them the biblical standards for marriage. This was no simple matter, as certain cultural customs had to be followed. They had to get the elders of the community to approach Wudasi's father for permission to marry. It was the custom for the father to object to the marriage and required several visits by the elders of the community before permission was granted. The dowry also had to be discussed. Eventually, all the requirements were met, though the father did not give final permission until the day of the wedding. Jean gave the wedding sermon to a large group of people. It certainly was a happy occasion, and now many years later they have 5 children and a successful business. Tesfaye Gosa was one of the 3 blind men who were fruit of the ministry in the late 60s. When we returned in 1998, Tesfaye was married and had 2 children. He brought blind children to his home to live and to learn to navigate in a seeing world. He also served as a pastor of a church as well as assisting missionaries as a translator. Tesfaye was a great friend and has continued faithfully serving for all these years. I had the privilege of meeting Gomaja, a deaf girl who began attending the classes for the deaf in the late 60s. She was a very bright girl and learned quickly, but she could not grasp the truth of salvation by grace. Like a broken record, Joyce Vick and I kept telling her that it was Jesus only. This was not easy for her, as she believed that it was through the church and good works. Finally, she came to understand that it was Jesus only who could bring salvation. She accepted Christ as her Savior and began teaching in the school. She has remained faithful and for many years has been the director of the deaf school in Addis. 30 years later, we reconnected with her, and oh, what a great fellowship we had. It was my sad privilege to tell her that our dear friend, Joyce Vick, had passed and would meet us in heaven. We heard a sermon recently concerning the need for more missionaries, and when it was over, Jean looked over to me and said, "Shall we go?" I immediately replied, "Yes." However, we cannot go because of our age and health, but we continue to promote Ethiopia and missions wherever we go. Our prayer is that someone will pick up the torch and carry on the great news of the gospel. Yes, friends are friends forever, and the friends we have made over the years are still our friends, though we may not meet again until we reach the other side. Please subscribe to our podcast, The Regions Beyond, as we share more stories of our ministry in Ethiopia.